What happens when a decorated combat veteran who saved lives overseas faces a judge for parking violations? You're about to witness a courtroom moment that will restore your faith in humanity. This isn't just another traffic case. This is about honor, sacrifice, and a judge who sees beyond the ticket. Drop a comment right now telling us what you think judges should consider before passing judgment. Because what Judge Frank Caprio discovers about this veteran will change everything you think you know about justice. The date was October 17, 2019. Providence Municipal Court, case number 47821TC. The courtroom was packed that Thursday morning, filled with the usual mix of people hoping for reduced fines and dismissed charges. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their harsh glow on the worn wooden benches. The smell of old paper and floor polish hung in the air. Nobody expected what was about to unfold. Hit that subscribe button if you believe our veterans deserve more than just a thank you for their service. Michael Henderson walked through the heavy courtroom doors at exactly 9:32 a.m. He was 43 years old, though the lines around his eyes made him look older. He wore a simple navy blue button-down shirt from Target, khaki pants that had seen better days, and scuffed brown shoes he'd polished that morning. His stride was different from others in the room. Military bearing never quite leaves you. Straight back, measured steps, eyes forward. But there was something else. A slight hesitation in his left leg, a barely perceptible pause every third step that most people wouldn't notice. But Judge Caprio noticed everything. Michael carried a manila envelope in his right hand. His left hand, you could see if you looked closely, had scarring along the knuckles and up the wrist, the kind of scarring that comes from fire or explosion. He took his seat in the third row and waited. His jaw was set, his face calm. But if you watched carefully, you'd see his right foot tapping. Nervous energy he couldn't quite suppress. The bailiff called out names. Rebecca Morrison, Thomas Chen, David Ogilvy. One by one, people approached the bench. Minor infractions, expired meters, parking in restricted zones. Judge Caprio listened with his characteristic patience. This was the man who'd become known nationwide for his compassion, his wisdom, his ability to see the human being behind the citation. Like this video right now if you've ever felt judged unfairly, because this story is for everyone who's ever needed someone to see their full story. At 68 years old, Judge Frank Caprio had presided over thousands of cases. His courtroom had become famous through social media videos that showed his unique approach to justice. He didn't just see violations, he saw people. Circumstances. Lives behind the paperwork. His gray hair was neatly combed, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his black robe crisp and dignified. But it was his eyes that struck people. Kind eyes, eyes that had seen enough of life to know that everyone has a story. Michael Henderson, case number 47821TC. Michael stood. The envelope crinkled slightly in his grip as he walked toward the bench. The courtroom quieted. There was something about his presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He stopped at the designated spot, standing at attention without realizing it. Old habits. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," Judge Caprio said warmly. His voice carried that distinctive Rhode Island accent, friendly and approachable. "I see here you've received 3 parking tickets over the past 2 months. 2 on Westminster Street, 1 on Weybosset Street. All in the downtown area. All during restricted hours. That's $450 in fines total." "Yes, Your Honor," Michael said. His voice was steady but quiet. Judge Caprio looked down at the paperwork, then back up at Michael. "Tell me about these tickets. What's the situation here?" Quote. Michael shifted his weight. The courtroom leaned in collectively, though no one moved. It's that thing that happens when everyone senses something important is about to be said. "Your Honor, I was attending appointments at the VA hospital, the Veterans Affairs Medical Center. The parking situation there is difficult, and I had back-to-back appointments that ran long." The VA hospital, Judge Caprio repeated. He set down his pen. "Are you a veteran, Mr. Henderson?" Quote, "Yes, sir. United States Marine Corps. Served from 1994 to 2016. 22 years. A shift happened in the room. You could feel it. The energy changed. Someone in the gallery whispered to their neighbor. Judge Caprio removed his reading glasses and looked directly at Michael. Really looked at him. 22 years. That's a career. That's a life of service. What was your rank when you left?" Quote, "Gunnery Sergeant, Your Honor." Share this video with a veteran in your life who needs to know their service matters, because what happens next proves that some people still care. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "Gunnery Sergeant, that's earned, not given. Where did you serve?" Quote, Michael's foot stopped tapping. His shoulders settled into a different posture. Not relaxed, but resolved. "Multiple deployments, sir. Iraq, Afghanistan. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. Various other locations I can't really talk about." The judge leaned forward. "What kind of work did you do?" Quote, "Combat engineer, Your Honor. Bomb disposal. IED, identification and neutralization." The courtroom went completely silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the HVAC system, the rustle of clothing, the breathing of 50 people all holding their breath at once. Everyone knew what that meant. IEDs, improvised explosive devices, the signature weapon of modern warfare. The invisible killer that took more American lives and limbs than almost any other threat in Iraq and Afghanistan. Judge Caprio set down his papers entirely. "You defused bombs." "Yes, sir, that was my job." "How many?" Quote. Michael paused. His eyes went somewhere else for a moment, somewhere far away, somewhere hot and dusty and terrifying. "I stopped counting after the first 100, Your Honor. It wasn't about the numbers. It was about bringing my Marines home safe." A woman in the front row, there for her own parking violation, had tears in her eyes. The young man next to her stared at Michael with something like awe. The bailiff, a veteran himself from Vietnam, stood a little straighter. "Mr. Henderson," Judge Caprio said, his voice softer now, "those appointments at the VA, what were they for?" Quote, This was the moment. This was where Michael had to decide how much to reveal. His hand tightened on the envelope. "Medical appointments, Your Honor. Follow-ups from my service." "What kind of follow-ups?" Quote, Michael hesitated. Judge Caprio had a gift for reading people. He could see the reluctance, the pride fighting against the truth, the desire to minimize what was clearly significant. "You can tell me," the judge said gently. "This court has heard everything. There's no shame here. If you've ever struggled to ask for help, drop a comment below. This story is about to show us why vulnerability takes more courage than any battlefield." Michael took a breath. "I was injured in Afghanistan, Your Honor. Helmand Province. September 2014. My unit was clearing a route for a convoy. Civilian vehicles, families trying to evacuate from Taliban territory. We'd cleared 8 IEDs that day. We were exhausted. It was 115 degrees. The 9th one was sophisticated. Different trigger mechanism than we'd seen before." He paused. The courtroom waited. No one moved. No one coughed. No one checked their phone. I was the team leader. My job was to do the final approach. My teammate, Lance Corporal Anthony Rodriguez, he was 22 years old. Kid from El Paso, Texas. Bright future. Wanted to be a teacher when he got out. He'd just gotten engaged. Her name was Sarah. I'd seen the pictures. She was beautiful. They were planning a wedding for when he got back. Michael's voice remained steady, but something in his eyes changed. Anthony spotted something I'd missed. A secondary device. Hidden pressure plate designed to detonate when the first bomb squad member approached. He saw it before I did. He pushed me out of the way. The device detonated. Anthony took the full impact. The woman in the front row was openly crying now. The young man next to her had his hand over his mouth. Judge Caprio's eyes glistened. "Anthony saved my life," Michael continued, "but I didn't walk away unharmed. The blast threw me 15 feet. Shrapnel injuries. 2nd and 3rd degree burns on my left arm and leg. traumatic brain injury, hearing loss in my left ear. But I lived. Anthony died in the helicopter before we reached the field hospital. I held his hand the whole way. I was holding it when he left us. Michael's jaw tightened. He blinked rapidly. I made a promise to him in that helicopter. I promised him that I'd make sure his sacrifice mattered, that I'd live a life worthy of the gift he gave me, that I'd help other veterans who came home broken, the way I was broken. Judge Caprio wiped his eyes without embarrassment. Is that why you were at the VA hospital? Treatment for your injuries? Quote, partly, Your Honor. I received treatment for chronic pain from my injuries, physical therapy for my leg, counseling for PTSD, but I also volunteer there 3 days a week. I help other veterans navigate the system, fill out their paperwork, drive them to appointments if they need it, sit with them when they have procedures and no family nearby. I mentor younger vets who are struggling with the transition to civilian life. He held up the manila envelope. I brought documentation of my appointments and my volunteer schedule. I'm not trying to excuse the parking violations, Your Honor. I broke the law. I accept that. But I want you to understand why I was there. The parking garage at the VA is under construction, has been for 8 months. They've lost 200 parking spaces. My appointments run long because there's a shortage of providers. Every appointment scheduled for 30 minutes actually takes 90. By the time I finish, my meter has expired, or I'm in a restricted zone I didn't realize had time limits. Hit that like button if you think our broken VA system is failing the people who served us, because this veteran deserves better. Judge Caprio took the envelope. He opened it carefully, with respect, as if it contained something sacred. He pulled out several documents. Official VA letterhead, appointment schedule showing back-to-back sessions, a letter from the VA volunteer coordinator describing Michael's service, a medical summary with portions redacted for privacy but enough visible to show the extent of his injuries, physical therapy logs, prescription lists. There were photographs too. Michael in his dress blues at a promotion ceremony. Michael with his unit in Afghanistan, all of them dusty and exhausted but smiling. Michael at Anthony Rodriguez's funeral, standing at attention in the rain. And one more photo, recent. Michael with an elderly veteran in a wheelchair, both smiling outside the VA hospital. Judge Caprio studied each document. He took his time. The courtroom waited. This wasn't just about parking tickets anymore. Everyone in that room understood they were witnessing something profound. A moment where bureaucracy and humanity intersected. Where the law met justice. Where the letter of the code confronted the spirit of compassion. Mr. Henderson, the judge finally said, I want to make sure I understand your current situation. You live here in Providence? Quote, yes, Your Honor. Small apartment on Federal Hill. 1 bedroom. It's all I need. Are you employed? Quote, I work part-time at a warehouse. Loading dock supervisor. They're good to me there. They work around my medical appointments and my volunteer schedule. The pay is modest, but it covers my rent and expenses. And these fines. $450. That's a significant sum for you. It wasn't a question, but Michael answered anyway. It's about half my monthly income after rent, Your Honor. I was planning to request a payment plan. Judge Caprio nodded. He looked at the documents again, then at Michael. Tell me about the other veterans you help. The ones you volunteer with at the VA. Michael's posture changed slightly. His face softened. This was clearly the part of his life that gave him purpose. There's a lot of them, Your Honor, more than people realize. Veterans from Vietnam who still carry invisible wounds. Gulf War vets dealing with chronic illnesses nobody understands. Young men and women my age from Iraq and Afghanistan trying to figure out who they are now that the war is over. Some of them don't have family. Some have family but feel isolated anyway. Some are homeless. Some are fighting addiction. Some are just lost. Comment below if you know a veteran who's struggling, because awareness is the first step to helping. I try to be what I needed when I first came back, Michael continued. Someone who understands. Someone who doesn't judge. Someone who shows up. There's this kid, Marcus Williams. He's 26. Army. Lost both legs below the knee in an IED blast in Syria. He was so angry when I first met him. Angry at the world. Angry at God. Angry at himself. He wouldn't do his physical therapy. wouldn't talk to his family, was drinking himself to death in a VA hospital room. I sat with Marcus every day for 3 weeks. Just sat there, didn't push, didn't lecture. Just showed him my scars. Told him my story. Told him about Anthony. About the promise I made. About how the way we honor the ones who didn't come home is by refusing to waste the life we still have. Michael smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. Marcus just got his prosthetics last month. He's walking. He's talking to his mom again. He's enrolled in community college for spring semester. He wants to be a counselor. Help other wounded veterans. He told me I saved his life. But really, helping him saved mine. Gave me a reason to get up every morning. The story continued to flow. There's also this older gentleman, Robert Patterson. Vietnam vet, 72 years old. Wife died 2 years ago. His kids live across the country. He has cancer. Stage 4. He comes in for chemotherapy every 2 weeks. I drive him. Sit with him during the treatments. They take hours. We play chess. He tells me stories about Da Nang, about the friends he lost, about the life he built when he came home, about his wife Margaret and how much he misses her. Robert tells me I don't have to keep coming. Says I have better things to do with my time, but I tell him there's nowhere I'd rather be. Because he's alone, and no one should face cancer alone. And because when Anthony pushed me out of the way of that bomb, he gave me time. Time I didn't earn. Time I'm not entitled to. The only way I can repay that debt is by spending that time on something that matters. Robert matters. Marcus matters. Every veteran in that hospital matters. Judge Caprio was no longer looking at documents. He was looking at Michael with undisguised respect. How many veterans would you say you've helped since you started volunteering? Quote, I don't know, Your Honor. I don't keep count. Some I help once. Some I help for months. Some I'm still helping. There's probably 30 or 40 I'm working with actively right now. Over the past 5 years, maybe 200? Maybe more? They tend to refer others to me. Word gets around. And you do this while managing your own injuries, your own pain, your own struggles. My struggles are nothing compared to some of theirs, Your Honor. I can walk, I can work, I have a roof over my head. That's more than a lot of them have. Subscribe right now if you believe we need more people like Michael Henderson in this world, because this story is about to take a turn that will prove why character matters more than mistakes. Judge Caprio set down the documents. He folded his hands on the bench. Mr. Henderson, I want to tell you something. I've been a judge for over 3 decades. I've seen thousands of cases. Thousands of people. I've heard every excuse, every explanation, every story you can imagine. Some true, some exaggerated, some completely fabricated. You develop an instinct for truth after a while. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the courtroom. Your truth is written all over you, in your bearing, in your scars, in the way you speak about your fellow veterans with more concern than you show for yourself. In the documentation you brought that shows a life devoted to service. Not just military service, though that would be enough, but continued service, selfless service, the kind that doesn't seek recognition or reward. Quote, these parking tickets represent a systemic failure, not a personal one. The VA hospital parking situation is unconscionable. The fact that a decorated combat veteran, a man who risked his life repeatedly for this country, has to choose between being late for medical appointments and receiving parking violations is a disgrace. The fact that you were there helping others makes it even more outrageous. The judge's voice grew stronger, more passionate. You mentioned Lance Corporal Anthony Rodriguez, 22 years old. From El Paso, engaged to a woman named Sarah, wanted to be a teacher, gave his life to save yours. I want you to know that I'm not going to dishonor his sacrifice by adding to your burden. I'm not going to punish your service with fines you can barely afford. Michael's eyes widened slightly. Hope flickered across his face, mixed with disbelief. I am dismissing all 3 tickets, Judge Caprio declared. $450 in fines, dismissed in their entirety. You owe nothing. The courtroom erupted. Applause broke out spontaneously. The woman in the front row was sobbing. The young man next to her was clapping so hard his hands turned red. The bailiff was smiling broadly. Even the court reporter looked up from her machine, her own eyes damp. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. He raised his hand for silence. The room quieted immediately, everyone eager to hear what else he had to say. "More than that, Mr. Henderson. I'm going to write a letter to the VA hospital administration and the city council. This parking situation needs to be addressed. Veterans should not be penalized for seeking medical care they earned through their service. I'm going to make some noise about this. Maybe my small voice can help create change." Michael stood completely still. His jaw worked. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Your Honor. I don't know what to say." "There's something else," the judge said. "I want you to give me the names and contact information for the volunteers coordinator at the VA hospital. I'd like to make a donation to support the volunteer program. If you're willing to give your time, the least I can do is give some resources to help that program serve more veterans. Share this video right now with someone who needs to see that good people still exist, because we're not done yet." Michael's composure finally cracked. A tear rolled down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "Your Honor, that's incredibly generous. It would mean the world. The program is always underfunded. There's so much more we could do if we had resources." "Consider it done," Judge Caprio smiled. "Is there anything else you need? Anything this court can help you with?" Quote. Michael shook his head. "You've already done more than I could have hoped for, Your Honor. More than I deserve." "More than you deserve." Judge Caprio's voice rose slightly, not in anger but in emphatic disagreement. "Mr. Henderson, you've earned more than this country can ever repay. You've given years of your life, you've given your health, you've given your peace of mind. You've witnessed horrors that most of us can't imagine. You've lost brothers in arms. You've carried those losses and transformed them into service. You deserve everything good that can possibly come your way." The judge stood up, something he rarely did during proceedings. The entire courtroom rose with him instinctively, showing respect. "I want to say something to everyone in this courtroom today. You're witnessing what true service looks like. Not just military service, though Gunnery Sergeant Henderson's military record speaks for itself, but service that continues after the uniform comes off. Service that asks nothing in return. Service that transforms personal tragedy into community benefit." He looked directly at Michael. "Anthony Rodriguez saved your life. You're honoring that sacrifice every single day by saving others. That's the highest form of tribute. That's how we keep our fallen heroes alive. Through living well. Through serving others. Through being worthy of the gift we've been given." Judge Caprio extended his hand across the bench. Michael stepped forward and shook it. The handshake lasted several seconds. Two men from different generations and different experiences united by mutual respect and shared humanity. When they released, the courtroom erupted in applause again, this time louder, longer, more sustained. People were standing, clapping, some cheering. The bailiff came around and shook Michael's hand. The court reporter abandoned her post to do the same. People from the gallery approached. A middle-aged man in a business suit introduced himself as a Vietnam veteran and thanked Michael for his service. An elderly woman hugged him and said her grandson had served in Afghanistan. A young woman asked if she could volunteer at the VA hospital, inspired by what she'd heard. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, because stories like this need to be shared with the world. Michael stood in the center of a growing circle of people, overwhelmed by the response. He shook hands, accepted hugs, answered questions. His face showed a mixture of emotions: gratitude, embarrassment at the attention, relief at the dismissed tickets, and something deeper, something that looked like validation, like being seen, like having your struggles and your service acknowledged in a way that makes you feel less alone. Judge Caprio watched from the bench with satisfaction. This was why he'd become a judge, not to punish, though sometimes punishment was necessary, but to dispense justice in its truest form, justice that considered context, justice that recognized the difference between malicious lawbreaking and circumstances beyond control, justice that uplifted rather than crushed. Justice that acknowledged that courts existed to serve people, not the other way around. But there was more to this story. Because 30 minutes after Michael Henderson left the courtroom, something unexpected happened. Judge Caprio called his clerk into chambers. "Margaret, I want you to do something for me. I want you to research Lance Corporal Anthony Rodriguez, find out about his family, find out if his fiancée Sarah is still in the area. I want to reach out to them." Margaret Donnelly, who'd been Judge Caprio's clerk for 15 years, nodded immediately. She understood. This wasn't just about one veteran and some parking tickets. This was about a larger story of sacrifice that deserved recognition. "I'll get right on it, Your Honor." It took Margaret 3 days. 3 days of phone calls, internet searches, official inquiries, and persistent digging. But she found what she was looking for. Sarah Rodriguez, née Collins, was living in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. She'd married Anthony's last name, even though he'd died before the wedding. She'd kept his memory alive by working with veteran support organizations. She ran a nonprofit called Anthony's Promise that provided care packages to deployed service members and support to Gold Star families. Judge Caprio called Sarah himself. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you don't know me, but my name is Frank Caprio. I'm a municipal court judge here in Providence. I recently had a case involving a man named Michael Henderson, former Marine. He served with your fiancé, Anthony." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then a soft voice, thick with emotion. "You're the judge from those videos?" "The kind one." "And you met Michael? How is he?" Quote, "Drop a comment if you believe in the power of connection, because this phone call is about to create something beautiful. He's struggling, Mrs. Rodriguez, but he's surviving. More than surviving, actually. He's serving. He volunteers at the VA hospital helping other veterans. He spoke about your fiancé with tremendous love and respect. He told me about how Anthony saved his life, about the promise he made in that helicopter." Sarah was crying now. Judge Caprio could hear it through the phone. "I met Michael once," she said, "at Anthony's funeral. He was still recovering from his injuries. He could barely walk. He came anyway. He stood in the rain for 2 hours at the graveside. After the service, he found me. He told me what happened. He told me Anthony was a hero. He apologized for surviving when Anthony didn't. I told him it wasn't his fault. I told him Anthony would want him to live, to be happy, to honor the gift he'd been given. He's doing that," Judge Caprio assured her. "He's living it every day. I'm calling because I think it would mean a lot to Michael to know you're doing well, to know that Anthony's memory is alive through your work. And I'm calling because I think it might mean something to you to know that Michael hasn't forgotten, that he's keeping his promise." "Could I see him?" Sarah asked. "Would he want that? I don't want to cause him pain, but I'd like to thank him for being with Anthony at the end, for making sure he didn't die alone, for keeping his memory alive." "I think he'd be honored," Judge Caprio said. "Let me arrange it." Quote, 3 weeks later, on a crisp November morning, Michael Henderson arrived at the VA hospital for his regular volunteer shift. He walked through the automatic doors, nodded to the security guard who knew him by name, and headed toward the volunteer coordinator's office to check the schedule for the day. He stopped in the hallway, frozen, because standing there, waiting for him, was a woman he'd only met once, but whose face was burned into his memory. Sarah Rodriguez looked older than she had at the funeral 11 years ago. She was 33 now. Her dark hair was shorter. She wore a professional navy blazer and gray slacks, but her eyes were the same. Kind eyes. Eyes that had known profound loss and somehow found a way to keep living anyway. "Michael," she said softly. He couldn't speak. His throat closed up. All the emotions he'd carefully compartmentalized for over a decade threatened to overwhelm him at once. Sarah stepped forward. "I hope this is okay. Judge Caprio told me about running into you, about what you're doing here, about the promise you made to Anthony. I wanted to see you, to thank you, to tell you something important." Michael managed to nod. His eyes were already wet. "You saved Anthony, too," Sarah said. "Not his life, That wasn't possible. But you saved his last moments from being alone and terrified. You held his hand. You stayed with him. You made sure his sacrifice mattered. You've been living a life that honors what he did. That means everything to me, more than you can possibly know. Like this video if you believe some promises are sacred, because this reunion is about to reveal something that will change Michael's life forever. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. It showed Anthony in his dress blues, smiling that wide, infectious smile Michael remembered so well. "I want you to have this. I have copies. But I think you should have one too, because you were his brother. And brothers don't forget each other." Quote. Michael took the photo with shaking hands. He stared at Anthony's face, young and full of hope, frozen in a moment before everything changed. "I see him sometimes," Michael admitted quietly. "In my dreams. He's always smiling, always telling me to get up, keep going, live the life he didn't get to live." "Then keep listening to him," Sarah said, "because he was right. You're doing exactly what he'd want. The way you're helping these veterans, Michael, that's Anthony living through you. That's his sacrifice, creating ripples of good that keep spreading. Judge Caprio told me about Marcus Williams, about Robert Patterson, about all the others. That's Anthony's legacy as much as yours." She pulled out something else from her bag, an envelope. Anthony wrote letters before each deployment. Letters to be opened if he didn't come back. He wrote one to me, one to his parents, one to his sister, and one to his team. I've been carrying the team letter for 11 years, never quite sure what to do with it. Most of the guys from your unit have scattered, lost touch, moved on. But you're still here, still serving, still being a Marine. I think this letter is really for you." Michael took the envelope with reverence. It was worn at the edges, carried and handled over many years. His name wasn't on it specifically, but "To my brothers" was written in Anthony's neat handwriting. "You don't have to read it now," Sarah said. "Take your time. But I wanted you to have it. And I wanted you to know that I'm okay. I've built a good life. I have Anthony's promise. I have my work. I have friends and family. I even have someone special in my life. A man named David who's a veteran himself. He understands. I think Anthony would approve. I'm happy, Michael. I want you to be happy too." Quote. Michael wiped his eyes. "I'm trying. Some days are harder than others, but I'm trying." "That's all any of us can do." Sarah smiled and opened her arms. Michael stepped into the hug. They stood there in the VA hospital hallway, two people connected by tragedy and love, holding each other while staff and patients walked by and discreetly looked away, giving them their private moment of grief and healing. When they finally separated, Sarah handed him a business card. "This is for Anthony's promise. We're always looking for volunteers, people who understand the military, people who can connect with families who've lost loved ones. If you ever want to get involved, I'd be honored to work with you." "I'd like that," Michael said. His voice was steady again, stronger. "I'd really like that." Quote. Subscribe if you believe healing comes through connection, because this story is about to show us what was in that letter. Michael waited until he got home that evening to open Anthony's letter. He sat on his worn couch in his small apartment, the envelope in his hands, simultaneously eager and terrified to read what his fallen brother had written. Finally, as the sun set and shadows filled his living room, he carefully opened the seal and pulled out 2 pages covered in Anthony's handwriting. "To my brothers," it began. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it home. That's okay. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm only afraid of dying for nothing. I'm afraid of my life not mattering. I'm afraid of being forgotten." Michael's hands trembled as he read. "I want you guys to know that serving with you has been the honor of my life. You're not just my team. You're my family. We've faced things together that most people can't imagine. We've seen the worst of humanity and somehow managed to be the best of it. We've saved lives. We've protected the innocent. We've stood between evil and the people who needed defending. That matters. Don't ever doubt that what we do matters. If I'm gone, it means something went wrong. Something exploded that shouldn't have. Something I didn't catch. Some mistake that cost me everything. Don't blame yourselves. This is the job. We all know the risks. We all made the choice to be here anyway because some things are worth dying for. Freedom is worth dying for. Protecting innocence is worth dying for. Brothers are worth dying for. I have one request. Actually, I have several. First, take care of Sarah. Make sure she knows I loved her more than life itself. Make sure she knows she should move on, find happiness, live fully. I don't want my death to be a burden she carries forever. I want it to be proof that love is worth any sacrifice. Second, take care of each other. This job breaks people. The things we see, the things we do, the friends we lose. It takes a toll. Watch out for each other. Get help if you need it. Talk about the hard stuff. Don't pretend you're fine if you're not. Don't drink away the pain. Don't isolate. Stay connected. You need each other. Quote. Third, and this is the most important one, live. Really live. Don't just survive. Don't just go through the motions. Whatever time you have left, whatever days and years I didn't get, live them with purpose. Help people. Love deeply. Laugh often. Find meaning. Create something good. Make the world a little better than you found it. Quote, the way you honor me isn't by mourning forever. It's by living so well, so fully, so purposefully, that my sacrifice creates an amplification effect. I gave my life. You use the life I gave you to improve other lives. Those people then pay it forward. The good multiplies. The ripples spread, and suddenly my death meant something. Suddenly, I'm not really gone because my impact is still growing through all of you. Comment below with the name of someone you've lost who inspired you to live better, because honoring the fallen means living well. I don't know which one of you is reading this. Maybe you're all together. Maybe you're scattered. Maybe years have passed. But whoever you are, wherever you are, know this. I'm proud to have served with you. I'm proud to call you brothers. And if my death saved even one of you, if my sacrifice gave you time to have a family, build a career, help others grow old, then it was worth it. You were worth it. Quote, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, take care of the mission. And when you're old and gray and surrounded by grandkids, tell them about the kid from El Paso who loved his country, loved his brothers, and loved his job. Tell them I didn't die scared. I died doing exactly what I was meant to do. There's no better way to go. Quote, Semper Fi, always faithful, always family, always forward. Your brother, Anthony. Michael read the letter 3 times. By the third reading, he wasn't crying anymore. He was smiling. Because Anthony was right. About all of it. The letter wasn't a burden. It was a gift. It was permission to heal. Permission to be happy. Permission to transform tragedy into purpose. He stood up, walked to his kitchen, and pulled out a frame he'd bought months ago but never used. He carefully placed Anthony's photograph in the frame and set it on the small table by his front door, where he'd see it every time he left the apartment. Every time he headed out to volunteer at the VA hospital, every time he went to help another struggling veteran, Anthony would be there, smiling, approving, pushing him forward. The next day, Michael called Sarah and told her he wanted to volunteer with Anthony's promise. They met for coffee and planned out how he could contribute. His experience working with veterans at the VA hospital translated perfectly to helping Gold Star families navigate their grief and find paths forward. He could speak their language, understand their pain, offer authentic hope, because he was living proof that you could survive unbearable loss and still build something meaningful. But the story doesn't end there either. Because Judge Caprio hadn't forgotten his promise. 2 months after dismissing Michael's tickets, the judge appeared at a Providence City Council meeting. He brought documentation of the VA hospital parking situation. He brought statistics on how many veterans were receiving parking violations while seeking medical care. He brought Michael's story as a case study. And he brought moral force that was hard to resist. We're failing our veterans, Judge Caprio told the council, not through malice, but through neglect. The VA hospital parking situation, is creating an impossible choice for people who've already sacrificed more than we can comprehend. They can be late for medical appointments they desperately need, or they can park illegally and face fines they can't afford. This is unconscionable. We must do better. Hit the like button if you agree that actions matter more than words when it comes to supporting veterans. The council listened. The local media covered it. The story gained traction. Within 3 months, the city had allocated emergency funding to create additional parking near the VA hospital. Temporary lots were established. Shuttle services were implemented. And crucially, a new policy was enacted. Veterans with documented medical appointments at the VA hospital would be granted parking grace periods and fine forgiveness for violations incurred while seeking care. They called it the Henderson Protocol, though Michael hadn't asked for it and was embarrassed by the attention. But Judge Caprio insisted. "Your story created this change," the judge told him. "Own it. Let it inspire other changes. Let it show what's possible when we choose compassion over bureaucracy." Michael returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom 6 months after his original case. This time as a guest, not a defendant. The judge had invited him to speak to a group of local law students about justice, compassion, and the importance of seeing the whole person behind every case. Michael was nervous. Public speaking terrified him more than defusing bombs, he joked. But he showed up because Judge Caprio asked, "And you don't say no to the man who changed your life." He told his story. The tickets, the VA appointments, the volunteer work, Anthony's sacrifice, the promise he'd made, the letter he'd received. The way one judge's compassion had created ripples that were still spreading. He talked about the Henderson Protocol and how dozens of veterans were now benefiting from improved parking policies. He discussed his work with Anthony's promise and how many families they were helping. Justice isn't just about the law, Michael told the students. It's about wisdom, discernment, understanding that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. Judge Caprio saw past my violations to my circumstances. He saw past my circumstances to my character. He saw past my present to my potential. That's what great judges do. They dispense justice in its highest form. Not justice that's blind, but justice that sees everything and responds with wisdom. The students gave him a standing ovation. Several approached him afterward, asking questions, thanking him for his service, expressing their desire to practice law with the same compassion Judge Caprio had shown. One young woman, a third-year law student named Jennifer Kwan, told him her father was a Vietnam veteran who struggled with PTSD. She asked for information about the VA volunteer program. She wanted to help. Michael's story had inspired her to do more than just practice law. It had inspired her to serve. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because stories like this prove that one person's courage can inspire thousands. Jennifer did volunteer. She brought 3 of her classmates with her. Those classmates told their friends. Within 6 months, the VA hospital volunteer program had doubled in size. The waiting list for veterans needing assistance disappeared. Programs expanded. Services improved. And it all traced back to one parking ticket case and one judge who cared enough to look deeper. Michael's life transformed in other ways, too. His work with Anthony's Promise led to speaking opportunities at veteran events. He became a regional advocate for veteran mental health services. The warehouse where he worked promoted him to operations manager with a substantial raise and better benefits. He moved to a nicer apartment. He adopted a dog, a golden retriever mix from a local shelter that he named Anthony. The dog became his companion and therapy animal, accompanying him to the VA hospital where veterans loved seeing him. Most importantly, Michael started dating. Her name was Christina Morales. She was a nurse at the VA hospital who'd noticed him during his volunteer shifts. She admired his dedication and gentleness with patients. She'd finally worked up the courage to ask him to coffee. They'd been together for 4 months now, taking it slow, but building something real. Something hopeful. Christina understood his struggles. Her brother had served in Iraq. She knew about PTSD, about survivor's guilt, about the invisible wounds that don't show up on medical charts. One evening, after dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Federal Hill, Christina asked Michael about Anthony. "Tell me about him. Not about how he died. About who he was. What he loved. What made him laugh." They sat in Michael's apartment with Anthony. The dog sprawled across their feet, and Michael told stories about Anthony's terrible singing voice and how he'd sing country music at full volume in the shower, driving everyone crazy. About his addiction to beef jerky and how he'd hoarded it like treasure. About the time he'd convinced everyone that he could speak Pashto fluently, only to reveal he'd been reciting Spanish curse words he'd learned in high school. About his terrible poker face and how they'd cleaned him out every game night. About his letters to Sarah that he'd write by flashlight, laboring over every word because he wanted them to be perfect. "He sounds like he was wonderful," Christina said. "He was the best of us," Michael replied. "I think about what he could have become, the kids he would have taught, the lives he would have touched, the family he and Sarah would have built, all that potential, gone in an instant." "But not wasted," Christina said gently. "Look at what his sacrifice created. You're helping hundreds of veterans. Sarah's running an organization that serves thousands of families. Judge Caprio changed city policy. Students are becoming better lawyers. The VA hospital has more volunteers. I met you because of the work you do that grew from the promise you made to him. Anthony's death was a tragedy, but his legacy is beautiful. That's not nothing. That's everything. Share this video with someone who needs to know that tragedy can transform into purpose, because this is what healing looks like." Michael kissed her. Soft and sweet and full of gratitude for her wisdom and compassion, Anthony the dog wagged his tail, happy that his humans were happy. 1 year after his court appearance, Michael received an unexpected invitation. The Marine Corps League of Rhode Island wanted to honor him at their annual Veterans Day ceremony. They'd heard about his volunteer work, his advocacy, and his embodiment of Marine Corps values in civilian life. They were presenting him with the League's Civilian Service Award. Michael tried to decline. He didn't feel worthy of recognition. He was just doing what he should be doing, what any Marine would do. But the League insisted, and Judge Caprio himself called to tell Michael he'd be in attendance and would be personally disappointed if Michael didn't show up. So Michael went. He wore a suit that Christina helped him pick out. He brought Sarah as his guest. The ceremony was held at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium in downtown Providence. Hundreds of people attended, veterans from every branch of service, active duty military, families, community leaders, media. When they called Michael's name, he walked to the stage on legs that felt unsteady. The League commander, a retired Marine colonel named Patricia Washington, read a citation detailing his military service and his post-service contributions. She spoke about the Henderson Protocol and how it had become a model other cities were adopting. She mentioned his work with Anthony's Promise and the dozens of Gold Star families who'd been comforted by his presence and wisdom. She talked about Marcus Williams, who was now enrolled in counseling school, about Robert Patterson, who'd passed away 3 months earlier with Michael holding his hand, making sure he didn't die alone, about the countless other veterans whose lives Michael had touched. "Gunnery Sergeant Michael Henderson represents the best of the Marine Corps," Colonel Washington said. "His service didn't end when he took off the uniform. It evolved. It deepened. It expanded to touch more lives than he could have reached on active duty. He is living proof that once a Marine, always a Marine. That Semper Fidelis isn't just a motto, it's a way of life. That the values we learn in service continue to guide us decades later." She presented Michael with a plaque and a medal. The auditorium erupted in applause. Michael stood at the microphone, this award in his hands, struggling to find words. Finally he spoke. "I don't deserve this honor. The honor belongs to Lance Corporal Anthony Rodriguez, who saved my life and gave me the time to do whatever good I've managed to do. The honor belongs to every veteran who's still fighting invisible battles, still serving quietly, still trying to find their place in a world that doesn't always understand them. The honor belongs to people like Judge Frank Caprio, who reminded me that compassion is more powerful than judgment. That seeing people fully, understanding their stories, treating them with dignity, That's what makes a society worth defending. Drop a comment telling us about a veteran you admire, because recognition matters and your words could make someone's day. I'm just one Marine trying to keep a promise to a fallen brother, Michael continued. But if my story can inspire others to serve, to volunteer, to help veterans in their communities, then maybe this recognition serves a purpose beyond me. So I accept this award not for myself, but on behalf of every veteran who's struggling and every person who's helping them. We're all in this together. That's what Anthony taught me. That's what I try to live every day. The ovation lasted 5 minutes. People were standing, crying, veterans saluted, family members hugged. Judge Caprio, watching from the front row, had tears streaming down his face unashamedly. He'd started with 3 parking tickets and a gut feeling that there was more to the story. He'd trusted that instinct. And look at what had resulted. This was why he'd devoted his life to the law. For moments like this. For opportunities to change lives through compassion. After the ceremony, Michael was surrounded by people wanting to thank him, share their own stories, ask how they could help. A wealthy businessman pressed a check for $5,000 into his hand, asking him to donate it to the VA volunteer program. A young Marine, recently discharged and clearly struggling, asked Michael for advice. They exchanged numbers, and Michael promised to meet him for coffee the next day. An elderly woman told him her son had been killed in Iraq and she'd been helped by Anthony's promise. She just wanted to hug the man who was keeping these organizations alive. Through it all, Sarah stood to the side, watching with a mixture of joy and bittersweet emotion. This was Anthony's legacy. This was what his sacrifice had created. A ripple effect of service and compassion that kept expanding. She caught Michael's eye across the room and smiled. He smiled back. A moment of silent communication between 2 people who'd lost the same person and found different ways to keep him alive. Judge Caprio made his way through the crowd to reach Michael. "Proud of you," he said simply, shaking Michael's hand. "This is what justice looks like in its purest form. Not punishment, not retribution, but redemption, elevation, transformation. You took your pain and turned it into purpose. That's the highest form of alchemy." "You made it possible," Michael replied. "You saw me when you could have just seen a violation. You took the time to ask questions when you could have just issued a ruling. You changed my trajectory by showing me compassion when I needed it most. I'll never forget that." "And I'll never forget you," Judge Caprio said. "You've reminded me why I do this work, why it matters to treat every person who comes before me as a full human being with a complex story. You've reminded everyone in this auditorium that veterans are more than their service record. They're individuals who continue to serve long after the uniform comes off. That's a gift, Michael. Don't underestimate your impact. Like this video if you believe judges should follow Judge Caprio's example, because the legal system needs more compassion and wisdom." As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Michael found himself standing outside the auditorium with Christina, Sarah, and Judge Caprio. The November night was cold and clear. Stars were visible despite the city lights. The 4 of them stood together, connected by a story that had begun with parking tickets and evolved into something profound. "What's next for you?" Judge Caprio asked Michael. "More of the same," Michael said. "Keep volunteering, keep helping veterans, keep working with Anthony's promise, maybe expand our reach, maybe train other volunteers, maybe speak at more events, if it helps spread awareness. Just keep living up to the promise I made to Anthony." "That's a life well lived," the judge said. "That's all any of us can hope for, to find purpose, to serve others, to leave the world a little better than we found it." Quote. They said their goodbyes, hugs and handshakes and promises to stay in touch. Judge Caprio had to get home to his wife. Sarah had a long drive back to Pawtucket. Michael and Christina walked to his car, hands intertwined, breathing visible in the cold air. "I'm proud of you," Christina said as they drove home. "You handled all that attention with grace. And your speech was perfect. Anthony would have loved it." Quote. "I hope so," Michael said quietly. "I hope wherever he is, he knows I've tried. I've really tried to make his sacrifice mean something." "He knows," Christina assured him, "and so does everyone else. 200 veterans at the VA hospital know. Dozens of Gold Star families know. City officials who implemented the Henderson Protocol know. Those law students who heard you speak know. Marcus Williams knows. I know. You've succeeded, Michael. You've kept your promise. Now it's time to make a new promise." "What's that?" Quote, "Promise yourself that you'll be happy, that you'll let yourself heal completely, that you'll accept that you deserve good things, that you'll build a future that's not just about serving others but about living fully yourself. Can you do that?" Quote, "Subscribe right now if you believe healing is a journey, not a destination, because this story is about to come full circle." Michael was quiet for a long moment. They stopped at a red light. He turned to look at Christina, this woman who'd come into his life and shown him what it meant to be seen, accepted, loved, despite all his broken pieces. "I can try," he said. "With you helping me, I can try. That's all I'm asking." The light turned green. They drove through the quiet streets of Providence. Past the courthouse, where Michael's life had changed. Past the VA hospital, where he spent so much of his time. Past Federal Hill, where his apartment waited. Anthony the dog would be excited to see them. Tomorrow Michael would wake up and volunteer again. Help more veterans. Continue his work with Anthony's promise. Live his purpose. But tonight, he'd let himself be happy. He'd let himself acknowledge that life, despite all its trauma and loss, could still be beautiful. That love could still exist. That hope could still flourish. That the promise he'd made in that helicopter over Afghanistan 11 years ago wasn't just about service and sacrifice. It was also about living. Really living. Fully and deeply and authentically. Anthony would want that. Sarah had said so. Christina had said so. Judge Caprio had implied it. The letter had commanded it. And Michael, finally, was ready to believe it. 3 years later, Michael Henderson stood in Judge Caprio's courtroom again. But this time, he wasn't there for parking tickets. He was there as a guest of honor for a ceremony recognizing the 5th anniversary of the Henderson Protocol. The parking policy that had started with one veteran's story had now helped over 3,000 veterans across Rhode Island. Other states had adopted similar policies. It had become a model for how municipalities could better serve veterans while respecting both law and compassion. Michael brought his wife. Yes, wife. He and Christina had married 2 years earlier in a small ceremony at the VA hospital chapel, surrounded by veterans they'd both helped. Sarah had been there. Judge Caprio had been there. Marcus Williams had been a groomsman, standing tall on his prosthetics. They'd placed an empty chair with Anthony's photo in the front row, acknowledging the man whose sacrifice had made all of this possible. Michael now directed the Veterans Services Program at the VA hospital. It was a full-time paid position created specifically for him, funded by donations Judge Caprio's attention had generated. He supervised 15 volunteers and coordinated care for over 500 veterans. He'd written a handbook on veteran peer support that was being used nationally. He spoke regularly at universities, military bases, and veteran conferences. His story had been featured in Marine Corps Times, on NPR, and in a documentary about innovative veteran support programs. But more importantly, he was happy, genuinely happy. He and Christina had bought a small house with a yard where Anthony the dog could run. They were talking about starting a family. The nightmares came less frequently now. The survivor's guilt had evolved into survivor's purpose. He still missed Anthony every day, but the missing had transformed from crushing grief into motivating love. Share this video far and wide, because this is what's possible when compassion meets opportunity, and the world needs more of both. At the ceremony, Judge Caprio spoke about the power of individual stories to create systemic change. 5 years ago, a Marine veteran came into my courtroom for parking tickets. I could have processed him quickly, assessed the fines, moved on to the next case. But something told me to ask questions, to dig deeper, to see the person behind the paperwork. That decision, that moment of curiosity and compassion, has now benefited thousands of veterans. It's changed city policy. It's inspired other communities. It's created a model for how we can better serve those who've served us. But more than that, the judge continued, it's proven that justice and compassion are not opposing forces. They're complementary, they enhance each other. Real justice considers context. Real justice recognizes that laws exist to serve human flourishing, not to punish people already struggling. Real justice sees the whole person and responds with wisdom. Michael stepped to the microphone when it was his turn to speak. He looked out at the packed courtroom, filled with veterans, city officials, volunteers, media, and the same bailiff and court reporter who'd been there 5 years earlier. Judge Caprio changed my life, Michael said simply. But not just by dismissing those tickets. He changed my life by seeing me, by asking about my story, by treating me with dignity and respect when I felt worthless. He reminded me that my service mattered, that my sacrifice mattered, that I mattered. Quote, in the 5 years since that day, I've tried to pass that gift forward. Every veteran I help, I try to see them the way Judge Caprio saw me, fully, completely, with compassion and without judgment. I try to remind them that they matter, that their service matters, that their struggles are valid, and their futures are hopeful. The Henderson Protocol is wonderful. It's helping thousands of veterans. But the real protocol, the one that matters most, is the human protocol, the compassion protocol, the seeing people fully protocol. That's what Judge Caprio gave me. That's what I try to give others. And that's what I hope everyone in this room will commit to practicing. Not just for veterans, but for everyone. Because we all have stories. We all have struggles. We all deserve to be seen. Comment below with one commitment you'll make to see people more fully, because changing the world starts with how we treat individuals. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a plaque in the courthouse lobby. It read, "The Henderson Protocol, established 2019, in recognition that true justice considers context, compassion, and the full humanity of every individual." Inspired by the service of Gunnery Sergeant Michael Henderson, USMC, and the wisdom of Judge Frank Caprio, may all who enter here be seen, heard, and treated with dignity. Michael stood in front of that plaque with Christina's hand in his, reading the words multiple times, struggling to accept that his story had created something permanent, something that would outlast him, something that would help people he'd never meet for years after he was gone. It was overwhelming and humbling and beautiful. That evening, back at home, Michael pulled out Anthony's letter. He still read it occasionally, usually on significant days. Anniversaries. Veterans Day. Anthony's birthday. Today felt significant. He read the familiar words, heard Anthony's voice in his head, felt the weight of the promise and the joy of having kept it. "I'm doing it," Michael said aloud to the photo of Anthony on his mantle. "I'm living, really living, not just surviving, not just serving, though I'm doing that too, but living fully. I have a wife I love, a home, a dog named after you, a job that matters, friends, hope, happiness. I'm using the time you gave me well. I promise you that, and I'll keep promising it every single day for the rest of my life." Christina came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "He's proud of you," she whispered. "I know he is. I hope so. I know so." They stood there together, these two people who'd both been shaped by loss and service, who'd found each other and built something beautiful, who understood that grief and joy could coexist, that honoring the dead meant living well, that the best way to repay sacrifice was to never waste the gift. Outside, the sun was setting over Providence, the city where Michael had once felt so lost, the city where he'd received parking tickets that brought him before a judge who changed his life, the city where he now helped hundreds of veterans find their way, the city that had become home. If you've watched this far, you're part of this community that believes in compassion, justice, and the power of seeing people fully. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because we share stories like this every week. Stories that matter. Stories that inspire. Stories that prove humanity is worth believing in. Anthony Rodriguez died in Afghanistan on September 19, 2014. He was 22 years old. He saved Michael Henderson's life and, through that single act of heroism, created ripples that are still spreading today. Hundreds of veterans helped, thousands of lives touched. Policies changed, hearts softened, hope restored, That's the power of sacrifice. That's the multiplication of love. That's the eternal nature of service. And Michael Henderson, the Marine who survived, who made a promise in a helicopter, who kept that promise every single day, who stood before a judge and received not punishment but compassion, who transformed his trauma into purpose, who honored his fallen brother by living a life worthy of the gift he'd been given. He's still serving, still helping, still showing up, still living fully. Because once a Marine, always a Marine. Because promises to the fallen are sacred. Because Judge Caprio was right that justice and compassion belong together. Because Sarah was right that healing is possible. Because Christina was right that happiness is not betrayal. Because Anthony was right that the way you honor the dead is by living so well that their sacrifice creates endless ripples of good. This is Michael Henderson's story. It's Anthony Rodriguez's story. It's Judge Frank Caprio's story. It's a story about parking tickets that became a story about justice, about service that continues long after the uniform comes off, about compassion that changes lives, about promises that define us, about sacrifice that multiplies forever. Drop a comment below sharing how this story impacted you. Tell us about a veteran you know who deserves recognition. Tell us about a time someone showed you compassion when you needed it most. Tell us how you'll pay this forward in your own community. Because stories like this only matter if they inspire action, if they change how we see each other, if they remind us that we're all connected and that small acts of kindness create waves that spread farther than we can imagine. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Thank you for believing that the world can be better, one compassionate choice at a time. Next week, we'll share another story that will restore your faith in humanity. Another moment where justice and mercy met. Another example of what's possible when we choose to see people fully. You won't want to miss it. Until then, be kind, serve others, live fully. Honor those who came before by making the most of the time you have. That's what Michael would tell you. That's what Anthony would want. That's what this story is really about. See you next week.